All right, man. Thanks so much, Marco. Man, it's so great to be here this morning. I kind of like to talk, so I've got some family there that's going to laugh at that because they know I just love to talk. Let me pull up my notes real quick, though, so I don't lose place. But man, I am just so grateful for you guys and for Vibrant. We came a few months ago. My wife and I did, and Pastor Marco and all of you really just blessed us in supporting us and so forth. And we were just so appreciative, really, of everything that you guys have done through Marco. And Marco's told you guys that I'm a church planner. We're starting in September. We've actually already got a location, which is we're thrilled with. That is really exciting. Right now, we're in the process of building up our team. The location that we've got, we're going to be launching out of Timberview High School, which if you know South Grand Prairie, Southeast Arlington, North Mansfield, Timberview High School is right on Highway 360. They're going to let us use the Performing Arts Center there, so we're super thrilled about that. And so here is a picture of my wife and I, just so you kind of know who we are. And I've also got, since I am a church planner, I've got to put a shameless plug out there. That at Frontline CTX, that's our Facebook page. Like it and follow us. And that way, anytime you guys see stuff, you can share it and let people know. That lets the people that you guys know in our area about what we're doing. And that helps us get our name out there again. So that's where you can see that. So, the thing is people ask us, why are we planning a church? And the reason being, and I love, Marco, what you were sharing before the service, which is when you look in kind of where we're at, or really in this area, anywhere in North Texas, there's only about 1 in 3 people that are actually regularly going to church. And so if you draw about a 5 or 6 mile circle around where we're launching from, there's somewhere between 200 and 250,000 people that are not connected to church. And our heart just beats for those people because we know that's who God is after. And we just want to create a church where these people that are not connected to church can come and find those relationships, find that they belong. And so our calling, of course, is to create a place where these people can find they belong without having to put on that mask. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? You have to put on that mask and pretend to be a certain person. I mean, any of you do that this morning? You got up, it's like, oh, I'm going to church, and so I got to put on my Christian mask. Right? I know I'm not the only one. Come on, guys. I know I'm not the only one. Because I'll get up, and it's like, all right, I'm going to church. And so I'm a Christian, so I got to put on my love mask. Right? Anybody else do that? Does anybody else put on a love mask? I mean, come on, Colossians even says put on love, right? So we go to church and we got to put on love. Well, this morning we're talking about joy, right? So we got to put on our joy mask. Right? So anybody grow up in church? I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Right. So you guys know what I'm talking about. We got to put those masks on. And so, let's see. Oh, wait, that's not a Christian one. So, but I mean, so this morning we're talking about joy. And you guys see what I'm talking about. And the question is how can we be filled with joy? How can we walk out joy? I mean, Jesus says that he came that our joy may be complete, right? But then it also says in the book of James, consider it pure joy when you face trials. Right, so which is it? And so we're supposed to understand and walk out this idea that we're filled with joy as followers of Jesus. But how do we actually do that? Is Jesus telling us to put on a happy mask? Is he telling us to do something that we can't really attain? Is he talking about what it's going to look like when we die and we're with him for eternity? Is that what this is? The thing is, if we're going to understand joy and what God says about joy, as we saw from the video, we've really got to start with the book of Philippians. And I think that's a really good place to look at what is joy. And the reason I say that is, so the book of Philippians was written by the Apostle Paul. And for those of you that don't know, the Apostle Paul wrote about a third of the New Testament. So when you look at Paul's story and you look at the New Testament that he wrote, if you want to know more about Paul, read the book of Acts. You can see Paul's story in the book of Acts, about the second half of Acts, and it's really an exciting story because you see things like a shipwreck, you see imprisonment, you see huge debates, you see mobs going and attacking Paul, a lot of really cool stuff. And so you see some really fun stuff in Paul. And in the book of Philippians, getting back to joy, is only about 4 or 5 pages long. But he mentions joy or rejoice 16 times in these few short pages. So if we're going to understand joy, I think it's important that we just start with the book of Philippians. So with that, let's Let's dive into Philippians chapter 1, and we're going to be looking at the first chapter. And so Philippians 1:3. I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now, being confident of this, that he, and I just want to pause real quick right here, because I think there's something really important on this screen. We see two words, and I've actually got these circled in my Bible. It says partnership and he. Who are we partnering with? Who is Paul? When he's writing this book to the church at Philippi, he's saying, because of your partnership in the gospel. Who's he partnering with? He's not partnering with Paul. This isn't the Philippians partnering with Paul. This is the Philippians partnering with God. And so this isn't my main point, but I just want to emphasize this, that we get to partner with God in what we're going to see through the rest of this morning. This is our partnership with God. Partnership and he. Who is he here? He is God. And so that's where the partnership is. That he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. And so we see right off the bat, we see the Apostle Paul in this book of Philippians address this issue of joy. And he starts talking about joy. But he does it in the context of another word. And that other word that we see that goes hand in hand with joy is thankfulness. Because joy is tied to thankfulness. Now, if I was going to make this a 5-minute message this morning, if we were just going to be done after 5 minutes, I think I'm right at 5 minutes, then this would be my only point this morning. That if you want to walk out joy, it has to come from thankfulness. Thankfulness begets joy. Joy comes from thankfulness. All right, we can go get tacos now, right? Are we ready? I'll go deeper. I'll go a little deeper. All right, I'll go a little deeper. And I think that's just a really important point to understand. And we're going to see more of that as we see the rest of this first chapter in Philippians. Yeah, but Ben, you don't know what I'm going through. You don't know what I'm going through. You don't know the stuff that I've been through. You don't know how far behind I am in my bills. You don't know what my ex-spouse is putting me through. You don't know the stress that I've got going on at work. You don't know the struggles that my kids are going through that I'm having to deal with. I may not, and I don't want to suppose that I do, and I'm not saying, ignore those to be thankful, but let me tell you a little bit about the Apostle Paul. And let me tell you a little bit about where he was at and what he was going through when he wrote these words. I mentioned to you the Apostle Paul wrote the book of Philippians. And so Paul was a missionary. He had gone to the city of Philippi, and he'd started this church in Philippi about 10 years prior. So he wrote this book to the church of Philippi, to the Philippians, because he wanted to help them mature. He wanted to help them grow in who they're called to be, help them to mature and become stronger, more mature followers of Jesus. And so he wrote this book, this letter to them, as I said, about 10 years later. But you see, Paul's dream was to preach in the city of Rome. Of course, at this time, the city of Rome is the center of the world, right? And so his dream was to preach to thousands of people in the city of Rome and see the city of Rome become converted, that it might start to follow Jesus. This was his dream. But instead of walking out that dream, Paul actually finds himself in prison. Paul finds himself in prison, chained, and these are not prisons like ours. I forget what the prison in North Fort Worth is called, but I know there's one not too far from here. I know Lou Sterrett over in Dallas, and I think of Lou Sterrett, and you go up on one of 20 different floors, and you've got your cafeteria. Yeah, you got to fill up the commissary to be able to get your razors and all that kind of stuff. That's not what the kind of prison is that we're talking about. Okay, we're not talking about some of the prisons that we're familiar with around here. What we're talking about with Paul being in prison is he is underground, which means there's no sunlight coming in. So he's in a dark cell, but he's not in there by himself. He is chained night and day to a Roman guard. So when you hear that Paul is in chains, he literally has chains around him, chained to a Roman guard. The Roman guards shift off every 8 hours. So every 8 hours, a new guard comes in. The old guard takes the chains off, puts it on the new guard, and every 8 hours. And so when Paul writes this letter, he's sitting chained. But even more so, he's waiting and expecting to be executed. So as he's writing this letter, he's thinking, I could be executed tomorrow. I could be executed tomorrow. So that's the context that he's coming from. And so we have to understand, first of all, that Paul is sitting there going through this very difficult situation. Yet he says, I am filled with joy. I pray with all joy. And we see this idea of joy continuously come up through Philippians. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, what is joy? And I think we have to start with the question of, is there a difference between happiness and joy? The short answer is yes. And so I just want to kind of mention a couple of things here, just to kind of point out the difference. I think it's important just to start from the foundation, the base work. These are different ideas. Joy is not equal to happiness. And let me just share with you. Happiness is external. Joy is internal. Happiness comes from around us. Happiness is the external items that have an effect on us. Joy comes from inside of us. We see a verse, 2 Corinthians 4:16. I'm not going to read it, but you can take a look at it. It kind of highlights that point. Happiness is based on circumstance. Joy is based on Christ. Philippians 4:11, I will read this one. For I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. Circumstances have to do with what's going on, again, outside of us. It's the circle that we find ourselves in. What is happening around us? Happiness says, what is happening around me is causing me to have an emotion, and I am therefore happy with what is going on. Joy is instead based on Christ, which is, again, internal, inside of us. Joy, it doesn't matter what's going on around me because I am content. I'm filled with joy, whatever the circumstance. Happiness happens by chance. Joy happens by choice. James 1:2, consider it pure joy, again, as I mentioned earlier, whenever you go through trials of many kinds. There's also a verse in Deuteronomy. It says, choose life. We have the opportunity to choose to live with joy. And so the question then that we see is, all right, well, we have Paul, and we have this story of Paul sitting in a cell, bleeding, chained to a prison guard, and then living in this place of joy, even though he's expecting to die. And we know that joy is sitting inside of us. And you know, I think of that image, and it makes me really want to walk out being filled with that purpose according to God's will. Because when we say, I'm going to walk in his joy, we're saying, God, it doesn't matter what's going on around me. I want to walk out who you have called me to be, that I might receive more of who you have made me to be and be filled with that joy. And so I hear Paul's story, and I'm like, yeah, I want more of that. That's something that says, yeah, I think that's good. Now, see, here's the thing, is as followers of Jesus, you know, joy is something we get to receive. Joy is a fruit of the Spirit, and it's something that comes out of walking with Christ. I'm not going to get into what's the difference between the fruit of the Spirit and gift of the Spirit and all those different things, but joy is something that we receive as a function of being in relationship with Christ and really just leaning into him and falling more into him. And so let me just give you a little illustration. You said the youth are in here, Pastor Marco? Do you have a teenager that's not bashful, that's willing to come up? Send him up. He's not allergic to peanuts, is he? All right. Come on up here, Gavin. Gavin, right? Is that what you said? What's up, man? I'm Ben. Are you off for school for the summer? Where do you go to school?
Central.
Central? You like it?
It's big.
It's big. So you got plans for the summer?
Spend time with family.
Oh, that's sweet of you. Can I get an aw? So I got a message for you. See, God sent me all the way from South Grand Prairie because he wanted me to give you something this morning. He wanted me to give you a Snickers bar. Are you? All right, good, yeah. So I came all the way from South Grand Prairie for you to have this. All right, you want it? No, I'm just messing. All right, no, you can. I'll tell you what. I'll keep it up here. You can go sit down. Go sit down. You can go sit down. Here's the thing: is we think that that's what it means to receive the gift from God, right? We think that that's what God. You have that gift. You hold on to it in heaven. But that's not what happens. I'm going to go back. Hold your hands out, Gavin. That's what God does. That's what God does. He doesn't call us up to the front and say, hey, I want you to come get this and you got to wrestle it from me. No, God says, I've got a gift for you. Hold your hands out and bam, there it is. That's how we receive it. And so Paul illustrates how we receive joy. And I want to get real practical here. All right, because I do have a very difficult story. And I want to share with you guys that illustrates this a bit. April 3rd of 2016. My oldest daughter, this morning we just came with our two youngest. We didn't bring the other four kids that we have. But my oldest daughter, Ashley, she was 12 years old. And I was, as Pastor Marco mentioned, I was on staff as an associate pastor at another church. And we had just finished the pre-service meeting. Allison had stayed home because my oldest daughter, Ashley, had been sick. She had gotten like a stomach bug or something like that on Saturday. And so she stays at home. So after we get out of the pre-service meeting, Allison calls me up and she goes, Ben, there's something really wrong with Ashley. I think you need to come home and take her to the hospital. And so I get home and instead of going through, I'm not going to go through all the details, but we end up at Cook Children's. And when I took her out to the car, her eyes were open and she could see, but she couldn't move her body at all. She had no ability to move her body. I had to basically deadlift her up out of the bed and walk her out to the van and strap her into the van. We get to Cook Children's, and I go inside and I get the orderly. The orderly comes out with a wheelchair. The big dude. I'm glad he was a big dude. Basically just picks her up, puts her in the chair, and then, I am not joking, within 5 minutes of him putting her in the wheelchair, not only had we checked in to the hospital, we had been put into a room that was determined not to be big enough and moved to another room that was a lot bigger because they needed to make sure they had plenty of space for all of the doctors to come in within 5 minutes. Turns out what had happened was my daughter, Ashley, had come down with viral meningitis. So, Scott, you want to roll through the pictures? I'm going to have some pictures showing up there as I kind of share a bit of the story with you, and you'll see this. So this was her in the hospital, and what had happened was viral meningitis it's any one of 700 different viruses. It's not a specific illness that you catch. You have a virus, and the virus penetrates the spinal wall. It makes itself up into the brain, makes its way up into the brain, and then basically just scrambles everything up. And so over the course of the next 2 weeks, she was basically in ICU, just monitored nonstop. At one point on Wednesday, she closed her eyes, going to sleep. Before that, she was, for the most part, fairly coherent, even though she couldn't speak and she couldn't really move. On Wednesday, she closed her eyes to go to sleep. She did not open her eyes again for a week. In the meantime, she had to have brain surgery. They had to put a drain in her head because they were concerned about fluid buildup. And so after that, they moved her, after about a week and a half, 2 weeks, the doctor came in and said, hey, Ben, we think that the virus is gone. We think the virus is not there anymore. But what happened was when the virus went into the brain, it scrambled up a whole bunch of things, and she's going to have to relearn how to walk, how to sit up, how to talk, how to use her entire body. So we're in the midst of this, and so I remember about a week into being in the therapy wing. So she went from being in the ICU, and then she moved into the therapy wing to start working on having to relearn and how to relearn how to use her entire body. And so I remember about a week into it, where I'm in her room, and I'm a sociable guy. I talk to everybody, right? It's just kind of one of those things I do. And so there's a room next to her, and there's a boy that gets checked into that room, and he's about 5 years old. I remember I'm talking with his grandfather, and his grandfather went to Gateway, believer, follows Jesus, and so we spent some time really praying for each other's kids. Just really praying for each other's kids. In the name of Jesus, we tell this to be healed. We say walk, all those things that you pray, right? And so about a week after that 5-year-old boy gets up and walked, not immediately, but he had been fully healed, walked out of the hospital as though nothing happened. Meanwhile, at this point, my daughter has yet to even be able to sit up. It's like, what? You're in that situation. You're like, where do you put that? You know, where do you put that? As a follower of Jesus, you're sitting there saying, my daughter's, I don't know if she's going to live or die. And I'm told to be filled with joy. I'm told to walk this out knowing who Christ is. Where do you put that? And I know that was just, for us, that was so, so hard. I want to share something with you that I got from my grandparents in the middle of this. So my grandparents, one of their daughters had died of leukemia when she was about 22. So my grandparents sent this email to me, and I wanted to share this with you guys this morning because I felt like it's pretty encouraging. There were quite a few pictures that came up. I hope you got a chance to take a look at them. So this is from my grandparents. As you probably realize, we are stunned by what has happened to our precious great-granddaughter. We sympathize with you and feel for you immensely. This is especially because of the horrendous experience we had. This was an experience that we never really got over, and we can only retreat into the comforting words of Jesus. In this world, you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. And that's John 16:33. In spite of the seemingly negative attitude, we pray fervently and continually for Ashley's healing and recovery. We also pray that all of us might be drawn closer to the Lord as a result, and that God will be glorified in every way. So the first point that I want to make, yes, this is a very hard story. Yes, this was immensely difficult for us to walk out. Yes, you have no idea the amount of tears that have been shed because of what we had to walk through. But if you want to walk out being a follower of Jesus and we're to receive the joy that he tells us we're to receive, then the first thing is we have to stop asking why. Stop asking why. And the thing is you can die in your whys, and when you start asking why, you never find a solution. You never find a solution. You can die in your whys. And if we look at Philippians 1:12, now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. I want you to look at two words here, happened and served. What has happened? That's talking about our circumstances. What is served? It's serving God. Our circumstances, and this is something that we had to hold on to in the midst of what we saw with Ashley, is that our circumstances at the end of the day always serve God. Our circumstances serve God. And here's the thing is we can only serve one master. We can only have one master that we serve. We can either choose to serve the pain, we can choose to serve the heartache, we can choose to serve the hurt, whatever it is that's stopping us from having joy, or we can choose to serve the healer, serve the one that comes and redeems and saves and has all of the hope of the future that he is bringing with us and the opportunity to receive the joy. So we can choose what we're going to serve. But at the end of the day, we know that our circumstances serve God. And because of that, instead of asking why, I said stop asking why. Because of that, the question that we should be starting to ask is start asking what. Start asking what. And if we look at the next couple of verses in Philippians, as a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ, and because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. So what is Paul saying here? Paul is chained up. He is in prison. He's chained. He's got this Roman guard to him. And what he's saying is, you guys think this is bad, but you have no idea how many people in prison, all these guards know who Jesus is. Here's the thing. Paul has no idea the impact that what he is doing is having on the next 2,000 years. Because instead of preaching to thousands of people in Rome, Paul is now writing the book of Philippians and several other books in the New Testament that are going to minister and share the message of Jesus for the next 2,000 years to billions and billions of people. right? And so even though Paul is looking, he's saying, this is good, because here's what's happening. Because we get the opportunity to look back and see what's happening, we're saying, no, what was happening was amazing. And so this is really important to understand, is that something that is even bigger than Paul realized is what is going on because of Paul being chained. I want to share another note that I got with you, another note that I received during this time that I received from a friend of mine. And this isn't a couple, they're in their mid-80s, but they're just still lit up for Jesus. You guys know any couples that are like that? Their bodies are starting to fail them, but they still just love to go after it. And it's really just exciting to watch, right? And so this is a message that they had sent me in the midst of going through this. I said, sometimes these trips to the hospital are really ministry trips in disguise. It requires us to radiate the beauty of God in the midst of our pain and doubt. This is my guarantee to you guys this morning. You have no idea how many lives beyond what the Lord has shown you that you have touched. When we go through trials of any kind and we choose to walk out joy, you have no idea how many lives beyond what the Lord has shown you you have touched. There's no easy road when you walk with Jesus, but he has a way of giving us a special joy and a peace we cannot understand in the midst of our struggles. God bless you too. God is fiercely proud of your stand for him. Your witness for him is more grand than you know. I wish I had time to share some of the stories of the things that I actually did see, of the opportunities that we had to minister to other people. I'd love to share some of those with you, but it would take a while. I remember one time, for example, though, just sitting outside with Ashley. She's in her wheelchair. She's in a not in kind of the traditional wheelchair that you see, but it's got a high back and it's holding her straight. I think she's actually sitting in it there, but you can't really see it because she didn't have control over her head. I remember us sitting outside, and there was a young woman that walked by, and I could tell she just needed prayer. And just the opportunity to minister to her and pray to her is just incredible. Here's my daughter. She can't speak, she can't walk, she has trouble even controlling her body, and we're having the opportunity to impact somebody else's life. Another story is a young boy that had gotten cancer. God just kind of put us in a situation where we had the opportunity to connect with their family. They're concerned actually now about this boy having a relapse. He was just in the hospital a couple days ago. But I still get to stay in contact with that family and still pray for them and see God move in their family in the face of the trials they've been going to. And so instead of asking why, when we ask that question, what? God, what are you doing? What was it that I said at the beginning that we are called to partner with God? He wants to partner with us. And when we say, I'm not going to ask why, I'm going to say, God, what are you doing? How can I partner with what you're doing? How can I serve you in the midst of this? Then we have the opportunity to receive the joy because we're seeing more of what he is doing. And what that leads us to is the last point of, instead of focusing on the problem, we refocus on what really matters. We refocus on what really matters. So let's look at the next few verses, Philippians 1, 16 through 18. It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. What's going on here? So here we're in the first century, and what's going on here is Paul started this church in Philippi, and there's other churches springing up around him, and there's concern that these other churches are competing to get people, right? So this is called church politics. I mean, it existed 2,000 years ago. It's just part of people. But what is Paul's response? What does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of this I rejoice. So we're going through things. We have stuff that's come up. With the Philippians, it was dealing with these church politics, or for Paul, it was being in change. The question is, what does it matter? What is joy? Joy is the outflow of Christ in our lives when we gain the perspective of the enormity of his goodness and his overcoming power. I love what Psalms 126:2 says. I don't have it up there, but Psalms 126:2, we've seen what you have done for us, and we are filled with joy. When we refocus on what really matters, when we shift our perspective and say, you know what, God, this really is not fun. This really sucks. And I hate having to see my daughter in a hospital bed, not knowing if she's going to live or die, but I am going to stay focused on who you are. I'm going to walk out who you have called me to be. And I'm going to remember that I am dead, but for the cross and the blood of the Lamb that was shed for me. And when we refocus on that, the question is simple. What does it matter? What does it matter? What is the important thing? That we walk in such a way that points to God's glory. That doesn't mean that we put on a mask. It doesn't mean we don't grieve. As I said, I've shed many, many tears. It doesn't mean we don't grieve, but it means we refocus on what matters. And that's what Paul says in verse 21, for to me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. Because what does it matter? It's all to the glory of God. And that's what it means to receive joy. To know that no matter what happens in the face of the circumstance, no matter what happens in what we're walking through, no matter what the world may throw at us, it's a win-win situation. Because to die means we get to see Jesus. To live means we get to walk out in the fullness that he has called us to walk in now. God doesn't say that you're going to receive joy when you come to heaven. God says that Jesus said, I came to bring joy, that your joy may be complete. And for us to walk that out now is to gain the perspective of who he is and what he has done.